Cool. And we can go ahead and jump in. So starting at the top, there are no updates in the roadmap to share. Like we're still working on the rollout of all the dark mode stuff. Dan, Jeremy, and Sasha have been deep in the actual rollout of it and can talk more about that. Um, but I'm expecting to adjust any of our timings and schedules based on kind of this first experience of working with the other product groups. So whatever we had aspirations of, like we're going to do this in this quarter, this is where we get a reality check and we see if we can actually do that. um, so with that, I guess I can turn it over. You all want to share some how this project is going?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's going well, but it is a bit of a crawl. We've when I say we, me and Jeremy have pretty much finished auditing the whole of group source code and group knowledges areas. I've put some links so people can have a look and see what that looks like. Um, the focus has been on dark mode, but we're finding it's hard to switch off the part of our brain that's like, hey, I see design things. And sometimes the dark mode and the design are so entangled that, like the general design of the page, that makes it slower again. Um, the things that we think will require the largest effort and collaboration are the bits that are bespoke. That is, they're not using the design system for um, sometimes that's for good reason, and they should remain bespoke. Is a thing that only exists in one area. There isn't shared reuse of it,
Mhm.
or the thing could be redesigned to use design system elements. And I'll pause for Jeremy.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that's accurate. Those focus on the design side. Two non-design things that I think tie to the larger effort would be uh, creating a one-to-many approach for people to follow today, and then the process things for them to follow tomorrow to make this more baked into our process. But some of those are TBD. I pointed out below. I can address that later.
So alongside this, we're having to do these audits. We're probably spending more time code peeping. I think that's the phrase, than we should to check that the design tokens are being used, that pajamas components are being implemented without overrides. I've put a discussion topic, the ask is this something that engineering can support? Um, but and something else is one of the outcomes we were hoping for this is for designers to like sign off and be happy with the dark mode appearance, but finding it isn't always clear what they will be signing off, as the pages today are a mix of deliberate, hey, I've chosen this thing to be this way in dark mode, and oh, hey, this thing looks okay because it inverts, and we know that at some point we're going to turn off these inversions, perhaps. There's challenge. Part of the challenge for us is how can we help teams understand where color comes from and have them sign off on the semantic meaning of the color rather than the visual output. Um, so that our dark mode and modes in general and color in general across GitLab is much less brittle and a lot more resilient to change.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense about not having clear sign-off requirements. We can definitely tighten that up. I think to some extent, we didn't know yet. We just know that at the end of the day, we want it to be good, but at the same time, we don't want to ask designers to question the dark mode vision. So, right, it's trying to find that balancing point between the thing that you have designed, largely as kind of a heads down solo exercise. It works well enough in this page that users are able to be functional with it. So, trying to find that balance will be tricky, but we can definitely document it.
I've just Googled code peeping to see if that was the real word. Google's AI generated answer is not safe for this recording. Ah, all right. Let me back to the right agenda. Anyway, I finished talking. That was everything I wanted to say. Um,
That's super helpful, Dan. Jeremy, you got a couple things here still?
Yeah, I think Chris had a point here, like as well.
Yeah, I think if we're still inverting colors, there's really no point in getting sign off on that, especially if we know it's going to go away. Um, Earlier today, Dan and Nina and Jeremy were experimenting with turning the inversion off to kind of get that sort of dark mode on and dark mode off toggle that we had talked about a few months ago. And that seems like a more promising way to get their review, because then you can actually see, oh, here's what's here's what's white and illegible without tokens. So I think that's what we would need them to review and get sign off on.
Yeah, that's good.
That's interesting.
I just wanted to highlight like specific to sign off for designers. I feel like I get the impression that designers don't feel like they may own all the decisions. Like a lot of it's historical or it's coming from multiple places. So there might be very few actual like visual design UI decisions that they would own. So it's more of a like design consensus, like, oh, this looks good. This is using what it should. And some things that come from the system, I think we should be the ones to sign off and say, no, this is for these reasons accurate. I think it's the bespoke stuff that we would want sign off on and suggestions on how are you going to proceed with this so that it works and it's more robust. So I think there's kind of a mix in there of us signing off on it, them signing off on it, and then like a bit of a collaborative, like directional things. But um, yeah,
Yeah, that's a
and
good
I think
point.
we're gonna be working with designers that are like right now. I'm working with one that's onboarding, so they're not gonna feel like the same ownership about some of the things there. Also, we're going to be working with teams that don't have designers, and so we're going to own those decisions in a certain
Mhm.
way. So there's going to be like a good balance across, and every group's going to be different.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe the word sign off is something that we should tweak because I don't, it's the simplest way to describe the process, but really what we're looking for is just having them involved and not feeling like we're just taking ownership of their parts of the product and changing it without their oversight or input. Right? Like we've had pushback from designers from other teams that have done that, right? And we want to try to learn from that rather than continue to make those same mistakes. Consensus, maybe that's a dangerous word, but they need to feel part of the process. It's collaborative, right?
Yeah, yeah, or alignment. Just, I mean, we're being tasked like top down to do this work, and
Hmm.
so we have to like we're still kind of the DRI for this being successful, even though like there's like
Yes.
sub DRIs for
Yes.
certain things. So um, yeah, very collaborative. I'm sure we could pull something out of our values to like insert there. Like,
When in doubt,
um,
yes.
yeah, um, yeah.
Okay.
My last point, or go ahead, Jeff.
No, after you.
Okay. I do think that like we're still very early on. Like we haven't even interfaced with the teams yet to figure out like what are the reactions to the findings, like how do they take it, how are we going to best ask questions, what kind of questions should we be asking as we navigate it. I've got a meeting after this with my design pair, and I'm going to walk through some of my findings already. He's from a different group,
Mhm.
but just to get a feel, like this is kind of what we're going for. Like, how does it sit? How does it resonate? What would be helpful to you? Just do some more of that digging. And my last point is like I enjoy this kind of work. I enjoy like the annotation and digging in and finally seeing where the rubber meets the road, for lack of better terms, like where is the design system actually getting consumed and used, and how. Uh, but I do want to highlight that we'll probably lose some momentum the rest of the month, just with PTO holidays. And so if there's something we can do strategic, you know, thinking wise in the next week, how to leverage the rest of that milestone when I'm out for part and Dan's out for part, and we don't have that balance of sorting through these things and arriving at decisions just yet. Like, where can we best use our time to be strategic for when we're both back and charging ahead? So,
Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of consider the next milestone lost because so many folks are going to be out for so much of it. So we'll do our best, but I'm not going to be heartbroken if, we don't have dark mode figured out over Christmas.
but
One thing
Krampus,
that I
Krampus mode for the next month.
exactly lumps of coal in all of your stockings.
Yeah, cool mode. Yep.
You mentioned that you're finding a lot of areas, oh, shit, that aren't using the design system. So how do we reconcile that message with what we've been telling folks across engineering that like pajamas adoption is good, right? We've hit greater than 90% on the things that we're tracking.
Oh, this is a trigger. Like I don't know if you want to
It
go
is
into
a
this. Uh,
We don't need to rat hole
so
on it, but like that's going to be an important topic that we're going to have to be able to discuss with
yeah,
everybody.
yeah. So I I disagree with our current concept of adoption.
Okay.
I disagree with adoption in general because as a metric, because what what I'm finding is, oh yeah, look, there's GL form. You've adopted it. That's awesome. But guess what? GL form is wrapping a CRUD component with no form elements. That's not correct adoption, right? So it's like, well, it looks like it's adopted because it says so in the code, but in practice, it's not adopting the correct usage and everything behind it. So I think what I'm finding is there's a lot of coverage of the design system, but there's incorrect coverage. Like, oh, you're using text subtle, but it's on an icon. You've adopted these design tokens and styles, but they're applied incorrectly. So just from a code review standpoint, it looks adopted, but in practice, it's not correctly adopted or correctly used. And that's what we're teasing out a lot of is like, oh, these colors are fine and they're part of our design system, but really you should actually be using these colors or whatnot. And so that's why I struggle with adoption is I don't think it's a good metric to go on.
So I remember this coming up way back when uh, we had this discussion about the difference between adoption and compliance. And we're not compliant. Absolutely, people override stuff. People do stuff which they shouldn't with components. It's very hard to sort of put barriers around things people shouldn't be able to do. So adoption, is all well and good, but yeah, like Jeremy says, it's almost meaningless given the creativity of people in the company and contributors. Um, it's a hard problem to solve. I think we talked about going through page by page, which is, I guess, exactly what you're doing, right? Going through page by page, sort of area by area, what's wrong with this? So that's how we get to compliance. Um, I don't have any ideas how to sort of automate this to an extent because, yeah, sure, you could have a form. You don't have any form components in it. It's very hard to statically analyze that.
I
So,
imagine it
but
would be. Sorry. Sorry to
no,
interrupt you, Mark. I imagine it would be like, this broken windows concept. Like, if there are some broken windows, then there's going to be a lot. Like, if we can audit a large percentage of our code base, then that's what's going to be used as the examples for writing next code anyway. So we should get a lot more adoption.
absolutely, I agree. But I mean, in terms of like, it's going to be hard to get CI to sort of fail a pipeline for a merge request because, oh, you've not used this form correctly. That's going to be hard. But you're right. Once once we have this magical future where everyone's using everything correctly, everyone copies and pastes correct stuff, which would be nice.
This is an interesting topic, one that I feel like we may need to lean into more, because it's going to have a huge impact in the dark mode rollout, right? Like anything that's using pajamas, we're basically done, right? We've implemented dark mode and all of the pajamas components. Cool, great, we're good. But if a huge part of the product is not using those as intended or overriding them or doing whatever funky things that are not getting the value out of that, that's a pretty significant difference in message of at least of what I've been telling the company about, how the dark mode rollout is going to be able to go.
I'd
So
also just, sorry,
go ahead.
Microsoft have been doing, UI changes for decades at this point, and Windows 11 is just a hodgepodge of different UI styles. If they can't
Mhm.
do it right, we shouldn't feel too bad about not getting it right first time out, in a way.
Yes,
Like
I
it's a
get
hard
that for
problem.
sure. It is a hard problem. Absolutely. Design systems aren't a technology problem. They're like a people and organizational problem masquerading as CSS hacks. Like it's very tough to get, however many devs we have here all doing the same thing and thinking about things in the same way.
Yeah. So I think, to your point, the good news is that it's there, like it exists. We just have to get it shaped up into the right deal. And one of the things that we were talking about in our earlier meeting that like kind of stays in this meeting is that uh, I've been using dark mode for 3 weeks and it's not been a blocker. Like, and I find that from a product standpoint, we will be delivering on the goal of having a usable dark mode. It's the uh, but it's I think Chris, you said that, like there's fragility there. What we're trying to do is make that robust and repeatable, and that's what we're far from. It's very fragile dark mode at this point, and so the 90% makes it seem like it's way more robust than it is, and that's where I feel like that metric is misleading, um, and not maybe not as helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great if we could define some kind of compliance metric that we could measure and track, even if it's more hand wavy, right? Like, the pajamas code scanner is very, very robust and it's really easy to trust it because it's code analyzing code. But even something squishier would let us rally a story around like, okay, we hit adoption, but now we need to improve compliance.
Yeah, I'd say anecdotally, I don't know, Dan, if you would throw a number out, but I would say between I don't know, maybe 70% compliant. Uh,
I like that number. We've already hit the OKR. Good job, everyone.
yeah, but but the more incompliant things that we have out there, those are going to propagate and change that number. So that's where it's like there's a balancing act. Kind of to James's point, like if we can get it weighted higher towards compliance, there's going to be more of those things to copy and use. Um, but until that, I think there's still a risk of
Okay.
compliance being down.
Well, and I
And
think
it's probably going to, I
we're
mean, we've gone
doing
through 2 sections. It's going to vary quite a bit, when we go through different things.
to say I think it's relevant. We're doing this audit right now. Like what Mark was saying, one of the suggestions to reach compliant was to do an audit page by page. That's essentially what we're doing. Um, I think the outcome of this step is here's the list of issues and things that need to be fixed. Um, Maybe it's worth categorizing those by dark mode fixes and pajamas fixes, and we can prioritize, essentially prioritize those accordingly, or use them to update our guidance going into next year. Um, maybe the first couple of teams here we're doing a more robust audit to sort of see if is this 70% compliance the same across a bunch of areas. And that can kind of give us a sense of things going forward.
Yeah, agreed. keeping track of these things separately will definitely be helpful. Because again, this somebody's gonna have to do this work. We can reasonably do some of it, right? A lot of the dark mode application stuff. We're the design token experts right now, but the farther it goes into like, well, completely restructure this page to make better use of pajamas, I don't know that that's on us. So having those dividing lines and the issues themselves will be super helpful. All right. So James, I want to skip over this just a second to hop on this discussion topic that Dan started that's in this same vein. We're needing to do more digging into code to check the design tokens are used. Is this something that engineering can support? I know at the very least, the front end devs for some of these teams that we reached out to said, hey, hit me up if you have any questions. So anything that's technical on their side, I know they've already offered some support, like Andre on the source code side. But I think even, our team, let me not speak for you, Mark and James, but we can certainly take a look at that stuff as well, right?
So Dan, maybe you can expand on this because yeah, like because I would have thought one of the things we've been doing on one of my points was when there's been code that doesn't look right, we've been creating issues and tracking this. Is this when you say involve engineering, do you mean like automatically create issues like that, or how do you mean?
So as part of auditing a page, looking at the page, we might go, oh, there's a button here. To have confidence that it's going to work in dark mode, the best way we've got to do that is look at what CSS is providing the colors. And we go, oh, if it's using the button CSS variables, we can have a good confidence that this is using the GitLab UI button component with no weird overrides. And this is from being in the viewing the page in the browser, inspecting the CSS. But there's probably a more efficient way to do that for someone who can navigate the code base a lot more easily than I can, to go to the file, look at it. Oh, it uses GL button. It's got the variant applied correctly. It's not adding classes that have that change the appearance in a way that's not recommended. That's cool. Or you go in and you find, oh, it's trying to be a GL button, but it's actually using something else and reattaching all the classes manually. Stuff like that, I think, is identifying, cataloging those sorts of things is the request that I'm asking. What on the page is not using the design system in a compliant way that you can tell by the code, so that myself and Jeremy can focus on, hey, these things that you're designing that are bespoke, that shouldn't be part of the design system, spend our time in coaching designers through how to use design tokens to style their bespoke stuff or otherwise. Does that answer the question?
I think what I'm asking is like, do you think we need somebody to read through and manually audit it? Or are you asking if there's solutions for programmatically or auditing it?
I am asking without a solution in mind.
So, I mean, yeah, because what we have been doing, like you especially, is manually auditing to be like, oh, this is a SVG, it's using the wrong one, or oh, this should be using a variant, or this is using the wrong. Like we've been creating issues for that, so we've been doing them manually auditing.
Mm-hmm.
And like as we migrate all of our colors, it makes sense to also do that manual audit like we have been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Mark, you have some ideas on how we can automatically do it, but it's just like ES linting, right? Like that's that's all we can really do.
Yeah. Again, static analysis can only take us so far with this. The only thing I can think of right now for like it's a heuristic. It's not perfect. If you have a GL component, you can pass classes to it, and we would only allow classes that operate on the outside, as in, say, margins. You can only apply margin classes to a GL component. Any other kind of class, probably off the top of my head, I guess, yeah, probably something like that is probably a bad sign, a code smell. So we could. Oh, who's screaming?
Me, sorry. Carry on.
What did I say?
No.
No, we were just
I had
fighting in
formatting
Google Docs.
issues.
We're good. We're good. No, but that's an
So
interesting idea. Auditing classes to see like what's changing outside versus inside a component.
yeah, and that can get us some of the way, but it gets trickier because you can make it quite dynamic. You can have a class that's computed from various things, and then static analysis kind of breaks down at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could be, so say like the table component takes different props where you can say like set the TD class, and there are lots of ways to sort of creative ways, as I was talking about earlier, for people to sort of work around the system, to change the system in ways that we don't want. So automating it is tricky.
Let's just remove the class prop from all of our components. This is what you get. Game over.
So actually,
I think right now, Dan and Jeremy are doing a manual audit, and at the minimum, they need some support in doing those manual audits. And I think having the engineering perspective in there would also open up opportunities for automating some of this as well. So I think it's there needs to be, and we need some support with that manual process for the next teams.
I think that's a good point. I'd say just ping one or more of us when you encounter something that you want engineering's perspective, and we can just gather, these thoughts in our minds and figure out if there's a better way to automate this. I think that's the way forward. Yeah.
I'm gonna say it one more time, but I'm gonna be really direct this time.
Okay. Yes,
So
I'm listening.
Like you mentioned, James, we have been doing the workflow of engineering, like doing an automation mass migration, and then myself going through and checking, do all of these mass automations, migrations make sense? That I don't think that's a design specific skill. To look at a code output and go, hey, that looks weird. That's got some kind of smell. That doesn't seem pajamasy compliant. So the ask is, rather than it be a design initiated, hey, I'm finding these things, can you look into them? Perhaps for the next group that we approach, for example, pipeline execution, we haven't had a chance to audit. Maybe we could have engineering audits the code for pipeline execution. Does that, hey, I found all of these weird things. Here we go. Well, design goes, oh, here's all of the visually bespoke stuff, rather than it being a design looking at the code and finding what's wrong, and looking at the visual and finding what's wrong.
Okay, that makes more sense. I appreciate the directness. I think one of the biggest problems I've had with the mass migrations is like when you see something wrong, how do you like what is in scope for the audit and what is not in scope? Because yeah, like I've been creating issues, and it's a lot of effort to create those issues, and it's okay if that's the effort that's required, but trying to balance if the effort should be more mass migrations or better auditing. Maybe Jeff, you have some ideas on how we can balance these things, because often, like when Scott and I have been going through, it's been like, oh, this looks stupid. I can't. We're not touching this. Leave it alone. And if that task then becomes, okay, we're also documenting this. Okay, well, how well should it be documented? Because that can really turn into a significant amount of work.
Yeah. I mean, the heuristic that you've been using sounds right to me, right? Like there is more than enough low-hanging fruit, right? Like we're not at a shortage of work. We could tackle that and still have, probably a couple months worth of work to do. So prioritizing that makes tons of sense. And as long as we keep track of whatever else needs to be dealt with, even if we just have a list of like, hey, go look at this again, then we can come back and decide how exactly we want to tackle that, right? Whether it's a deeper dive or putting in implementation guidance and asking for community contributions. We can decide later how we fix it as long as we know what it is we need to go look at.
Right. Yeah, maybe you can have a think about what the structure that should be like.
Sure.
Is it just a spreadsheet that we're adding stuff to?
Yeah.
Because yeah, I really like we've documented it well, we've provided implementation instructions, some community contributors are going to pick it up. It's really great, but it also takes it takes a long time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm happy to skip that, but I just want to know exactly what the alternative is and what the process is.
Yep. I've got a couple of follow-ups from this meeting that I'll make sure to look at later today or tomorrow. But we need to wrap for today. I've got another session I need to jump into. Thank you all for your time. James, Sasha, sorry we didn't get into your sections, but I thank you for all of the CSS fixes that you've been committing. I've seen a bunch of the MRs and all the things that you've linked here. So thank you so much for your work. All right. Hope you all have a good afternoon. I'll see y'all later.